Good morning, sweethearts, and thank you for tuning in to another flip lesson with me. So, we're going to read the moral logic of survivor guilt this week. So, we just want to discuss a few things that's going to help us. So, here are our three literary or literacy tier 2 terms that we will be looking at as a whole this week. So we have argument, we have central idea when we're referring to informational text, and then we have central idea when we are talking about literature. Okay, and we can see that these two, when we're looking at central idea, they're closely aligned. The only difference is when we are focusing on it as far as literature, we're looking at it as it relates to a theme. And we know theme is the moral lesson that we can learn in any text. Alrighty, so here is our objective this week. It is very similar to what we did last week, but last week we focused on it through the lenses of theme. This week we're going to focus on it through the lenses of central idea only, because we're looking at a non-fictional piece. Now, yes, it is possible for a non-fictional piece to have a theme. Why? Because theme, although it's polysemous, when we're talking about theme in writing or in reading, we're talking about less universal lessons that we can learn. And we can always learn something from someone and their experiences. All right, so let's go ahead and let's break this down into its components so that we can understand it deeply. So we know that we will be able to determine the central idea of a text in order to analyze its development over the course of the text, including how it emerges, is shaped, and is refined by specific details. So we simply want to just figure out what is the important thoughts of the passage so that we can break down into smaller pieces the text development. Okay, when we're talking about development, we're talking about looking at how elaborate the text becomes throughout the whole text. Okay, alrighty, and then emerges is how it's revealed. Okay. All right, so here is what I want to do. I want to paint an image in your mind when we're talking about a few things. So when we're talking about determining the central idea, I want you to think about a support beam. So the support beam there is a support beam in all buildings. And what that does is that holds up the building. Without the support beam, then what will happen? Yes, that building will fall. So when we're thinking about central idea, we're thinking about that. And then when we're thinking about development, we're thinking about the details that the author strategically adds to the story, the examples, the imagery, and even additional information throughout the text. So we're thinking about it in context of each detail is like a grain of rice. And so the author is adding detail after detail after detail. And when we're talking about emerging, we're talking about the process of, like I said before, how these ideas unfold. So I like to think of it in terms of like a baby. So when a mother is with a child, that baby is developing within her reproductive system, and then it is a slow process and it's forthcoming. And so we know, okay, a baby's in there, a baby is developing, it's a slow process, and then bam, she gives birth. And the birth will be the central idea, okay? So think of it that way. And again, we talked about this last week. So I just want you to pause and just reread this and know that our purpose is so that we can write an argumentative essay, okay? And you will be thinking about, should people in life or death situations be held accountable for their actions? So let's think about our text. So I'm going to ask you this in class today, and we're going to do a think, share, and a think and share. So out of all of my family members, I believe that I am the most responsible. This is my claim, okay? This is my claim. Now, and I would have to support that with details that demonstrate me being responsible, and I need to have strong details that show that, oh yeah, out of all of your family members, you are the most responsible. So I want you to think about, who is the most responsible person that you know. And you're going to list 5 specific details in the chat box. And we're going to talk about those details in depthly in class, okay? So I also want you to be thinking about the text that we're reading. The author asked a different question about responsibility. And so I want you to think about that responsibility and how it is developed while we're reading this text, while we're analyzing this text. So let's talk about the central idea and specific details. We have talked about this before in class, so you will get a slide that's going to talk to you a little bit about review. And so the claim of the central idea is the main point or the message conveyed in the passage. We know that claims are opinions on a topic that must be proven and supported by strong details. Now, depending on the type of text that you have, there are specific details that support that central idea. That's where text feature comes in. That's where we need to know if we're reading an editorial, if we're reading a short story, if we're reading an argumentative essay, because if we are, or argumentative text, if we are, there is a structure of that text that will give us clues that we can look at. For example, there are certain features within certain texts that you may have a subheading. And so we will start looking at those things so that we can determine what is the central idea and how does these subheadings help us to be able to separate major details from minor details. We talked about that before. We're going to review that a little later. There are also hints in the text. So as you see in the chart to the left, that the author, if the author is discussing the central idea, he or she may say things or use phrases such as, and all of this we might say, or indeed, because what indeed is doing is intensifying what the author is talking about. There are also phrases that shows us that, or that show us that the author is discussing specific details. For example, as his remarks make clear, in his, her, this case, yada, yada, yada. Now, remember, we said that it's all about how the text is structured. That helps us to determine the central idea as well. Here are a few questions that you can ask yourselves as you are reading the text, okay? So we're going to take a minute to pause right here, and we're going to discuss this in class. So I want you to go ahead and pause the video and read this and see if you can determine the central idea and see if you can determine a few supporting details. And then I want you to have those notes ready, and then when you come to class, we're going to talk about it. All right, so you had time to do that, and as I said, we're going to talk about it in class. So let's talk about why this is important. It is important for us to understand how all of these components work together so that we can see how the author unfolds an argument or a claim carefully through reasoning. It makes us smarter. Reading makes us smarter. Okay? So the more things you know, the farther you go, as Dr. Seuss would say. Pep Talk. What's a pep talk? So a pep talk is simply a brief emotional speech designed to make a person or a group of people feel more enthusiastic, motivated, and courageous. We are going to talk about this in class. As a matter of fact, I give you pep talks every day. So in class, you will be listening to a speech, and then I want you to make an outline, and you see this at the bottom of your speech, okay? So here are a few things to remember. So when we're talking about central idea, we're talking about what the idea, we're talking about what the text is really about, okay? This may include the beliefs, the thoughts, the feelings, and the attitude about the subject, okay? So how can we determine the central idea? We're going to look at clues from the title. We're going to ask ourselves the following questions. What's the big idea presented in this text? What are the type of details that the author used? Again, looking at that text structure. And what new information is presented later in the text? I'm sorry, that did not pop up, but I fixed it before class. All right. So, major details versus minor details. We've talked about this in class. A major detail will always point us back to the central idea. It's going to give us specific information about the main idea. It could be examples, reasons, statistics, and studies. Think about when we read the piece from JFK, when he started talking about the immigrant contribution, and he started listing the inventors. He was giving us specific information that supported his topic about how immigrants contributed to the success of America. So then we have minor details, and a minor detail will always expand or explain a major details. They're going to give us more specific details than a major detail. It's going to repeat the key points, and it's going to be very colorful. Okay? Now, here's the thing with a minor detail. If we remove it from the text, we can still understand what the text is talking about. We'll still have a great view. Here is an example of what we're going to do in class. Okay? So then we're going to read this, and then we're going to determine the major details from the minor details. So let's talk about our literary focus. So we're looking at perspective. I love focusing on perspective, because if we understand perspective, then we can have an appreciation for everyone. And in perspective, I'm talking about the position of a person, the opinion of a topic. And we know that perspective is shaped by a combination of things: the beliefs, the values, the attitudes, and the experience that the author or speaker have. From these perspectives, we can always determine if there is a bias. And when we're talking about bias, we're talking about favoring one idea over the other, or a group of people over another. Our literary focuses when we're doing diddles. So last week we did the D and the L. This week we're going to do the D, L, and the S. Again, we do have idioms up here, but we also have italics, okay? And so italics helps us to see that there's a stress on the word. For example, I love him. And then the second time, I love him. So you see the emphasis on the word him. We know what diction is. We know it's always talking about the word choice. We got to look at the connotative meaning. We got to look at the denotation. It's going to create tone and mood. So when we're talking about syntax, what are we talking about? We're simply talking about construction. How does the author construct that sentence? That sentence, the construction of that sentence, helps us to understand what is being presented. Okay? We're going to look at it if it's short, if it's long, if it's parallelism. All right. All right, guys. So I am done. Please take notes. See you soon.